Everybody, it's Dr. Hayes here, figuring out how to use the QuickTime Player in order to go over the syllabus with you. And I'm really glad you're in class here. It's very exciting to have something new going on. Let's go ahead and take a look at the syllabus here, Women in the Old Testament, and we can see what's up for your class. First of all, there's a course description, and I want you to notice here that we're focusing on story. We're focusing on the stories of certain women in the Old Testament, not all of them because there are quite a few, but we picked out a few here from the Pentateuch: Eve, Sarah, Rachel, Rebecca, Leah, and Miriam. One from the historical books, which we'll start on this week, and that's the story of Hannah. And then people from the writings, Ruth and Esther. And there's going to be a few more thrown in there along the way just to make things exciting. What we're going to do in a large part is a very text-focused look at these, and so we're going to look at literary form, we're going to look at structure, we're going to look at the theological content, which is where we all want to go, I think. As much as we can, we'll hit historical background, and then we'll decide and talk about how significant these stories are within the canon. Okay, we'll also look at the role and status of women in pre- and post-exilic Israel. So in the end of the day, our learning outcomes are many. First of all, we want to read well. And so your very first short lecture, which unfortunately the quality wasn't good, and I do apologize for that, is kind of a talk about how to read well, some different strategies. So I gave you some quick guides on how to approach text, to read them carefully and to become familiar with them. So we're looking for content, we're looking for themes, and then we want you to be able to interpret that passage on its own, and then in its own context, the historical context, literary context, canonical context. So our very first go-around is to look at these stories within the original setting. Once we've done that, we want to look at central issues. These texts have got some interesting and important and compelling central issues, not always the same one. And so we want to be able to then articulate those, and we want to talk about the theological concerns and the ethical concerns. Many of the women's stories are challenging, and some of them are kind of almost overwritten to the point where there's definitely something theological happening and something ethically going on. And that's where these stories can get really challenging for us today. We, at this level, get to use English-based tools like concordances, commentaries, other kinds of tools, so we'll have some talk about that as we go about talking about your final paper that you're going to write. Okay. Number 6, and this is probably where some people want to start, but I put it toward the end here, is the idea of recognizing hermeneutical issues that arise from the context of contemporary readers. Okay. Sometimes we start there and then we want to go back and find how the stories would fit. But what we want to do for this class is look at the stories and see how they fit us. Okay, so it's looking at that kind of deliberately flipping perspective. We're going to go backwards in order to go forward and to do that really well. Okay, and we want to critically reflect during this class on the role of gender. Okay, we want to think about the role of gender that is at play for discipleship, mission, and ministry. So this is a challenging class on that end. But again, we're going to start with text. We're going to start with some things we can all focus on and then kind of work out from that direction and see how that helps us to fit in with our context. Okay. So the format of the course is a 10-week schedule, and I've noticed that Canvas is really nice about how that lines out. So I think it'll be very clear to you. This week's module is open, and you can look at it and you can see the reading. Then there's going to be a lecture, and then there's going to be a forum, and that pattern will come with each of the weeks as more and more things are put in there. So for now, concentrate on this week, and then there'll be more weeks that are very, very similar. So the format's going to be the same throughout. And I'm using a Thursday, Saturday pattern for the forums, so just in case you had questions on that. Okay, let's see what we want to talk about. Okay, the required reading, there's quite a bit. This is a big part of what you're doing in the class, is to actually sit down with the reading, and I would suggest each week you do that first. And sometimes it's top-loaded. For example, this week's reading will be used during next week's forum. So you're going to get a chance to read, you're going to get a chance to let that rest a little bit, and then you're going to get a chance to articulate, synthesize, and put together a response to what we've read this week. And likewise, it'll carry on all the way through. So you're always reading ahead just a little bit according to the schedule. So the alignment there is deliberate because I want you to have a chance really to think about it, to read, and maybe even chat with your form group a little bit if you want to before you start on some of these things. Okay, so some books you've got already that you're familiar with, and then we also have a lot of stuff in eReserve. So I tried to put as much as I could into eReserves, and that works really well. You can click on week 1, and this week's stuff will pop up, and then you know you've got all the stuff for week 1 in hand. So they've done some good jobs of tagging in there in order to keep you sort of straight on what is due each week. Okay, so assignments are the reading assignments. We're going to have short lectures, visual presentations. I'm going to try to find some musical scores for you because I think that's really fun to look at that part of reception history. I've given you a picture on the front, which is by a Dutch contemporary artist called Jip Weingarten. I'll talk to you a little bit more about her, but her stuff is really interesting. She's taken Old Testament and done some really interesting paintings from a European side. Okay, so we'll have our form posts, our form responses. Each of those are about 250 words, and you're going to want to respond to a couple friends each week. So I've made your groups kind of small, 4 people or 5, so you're going to have a chance to get to know one another in those groups. One of the assignments that I'm excited about is the one that fulfills a certain requirement for kind of the gender issues that we're dealing with here. So you're going to have one scholarly paper to analyze gender issues, and what you're going to do is use the tools that we're using in class, the Read Well tools, the other kinds of tools, and demonstrate a critically reflective paper that can be used in a contemporary setting. Okay, how can we then take, for example, the story of Ruth? What is in that story that would make it appropriate for us today? How can we look at Ruth from maybe a missiological perspective? How can we use the book of Ruth in ministry? Okay, one thing I've heard from my preacher friends is, will it preach? And sometimes we don't hear too much about these women's stories, maybe because it's hard to make it preach. And perhaps one of the things that can come out of this class is how to take story and to garner the truth that story brings and to be able to bring that to a congregation. I think there's some really transformative stuff that can happen there. Okay, we also have a 10 to 15 page research essay, which you're going to do kind of in parts as the quarter goes on. So by the time you get to actually having to turn in that paper, it's going to be probably 50 or 60% written. So it should be good. You'll have your research done, you'll have your reflecting done, you'll have your some of the stuff already prepared, and you can put that paper together pretty quickly then when that one is due. And then also the second thing in number 5, sorry to back up, but there's going to be also probably a creative expression. And this is something I've seen students really thrive on. So you'll be picking out a woman's story from a list which I will give to you, and then you can think about it. How would this play out in a story, a song, a psalm, maybe photography, painting, whatever it is that you like to do. You'll have a chance to do some of that in describing and interpreting the story that you're working with. Okay, now as I've mentioned, the Canvas is really organized as far as having things laid out, but I've also included a solid reading schedule here and an assignment schedule at the back, so you can see what's due every single week, all the way through the term. If you'd like to read ahead, for example, and you're all done with this week already, go, feel free, keep going. You're very welcome to read ahead as far as you'd like. The things that you won't find yet are the lectures and the other forms, because those are going to be forthcoming week by week, just as they would be if we were in a classroom setting. Okay, so you're going to get the gist of this. Each week has got a certain topic, and then the topic goes on into discussion and so forth. Okay, so you can read through there and you can find all the stuff you might want to find as far as what's to be read and what is going to happen during that week. I did not put a set of due dates in there because I want you to be leaning on the shell itself in order to figure out what paper is due when. Okay, so you might have got, trying to think if I did, no, I didn't put them all in there. Look down through the list of things, and then your stuff will be due during certain weeks. Okay, so I will open up some more of those parts so you can see when different things are actually due. Okay, so any questions on the syllabus or anything else about the class, be sure that you contact me. If it's a personal issue, use my email, Beth_Hayes@fuller.edu, Or if it's something the whole class is interested in, please use the course question forum, because sometimes you'll A, go in there and find your question already was asked, or B, 10 or 11 students that come in and go, oh, I'm glad you asked that because I had that question as well. So while things look fairly orderly from my end, I'm always really glad to hear what happens when you look at it, because sometimes it's a little like playing telephone and it's maybe not as clear as we would like it to be. So always on an online class like this, feel really free to ask questions. That's part and parcel of the format. Good. Okay, I'm going to see if I can continue and put this into iMovie, and I will talk to all of you soon.